Welcome, everyone. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, fellow participants from near and far. Welcome to the eighth edition of the Hague Conversation on Conflict. My name is Alexandre Taillandier, and I'm the Community and Programming Manager at the Hague Humanity Hub. Today, we're here to talk about an important conflict and are joined by distinguished guests. But before this, a few words about the Hague and the Humanity Hub. We are here, situated in the Humanity Hub, as you can see behind me, at the heart of the international city of peace and justice, The Hague. Hundreds of organizations and thousands of professionals, international legal experts, justice innovators, humanitarians, peace builders, and many others call the city their home and work every day to achieve a more peaceful and just world. The Hague Humanity Hub, established in 2018, aims to strengthen this diverse and vibrant ecosystem by building community and fostering connection and collaboration. One way we do this is by creating innovative programming like this one today, with members of our community. Started in 2019 by Links Europe and the Hague Humanity Hub, the Hague Conversations on Conflict aims to rethink approaches to conflict prevention and resolution, and to provide a forum where the changing nature of conflict can be analyzed and assessed, together with the responses of international society. But more on this and today's conflict from my colleague, Will.
So thank you very much, Alex, for the introduction. And from me, another welcome to the eighth event in the Hague Conversations on Conflict. My name is William Murray. I'm Senior Editor and Coordinator at Links Europe, and it is my pleasure today to be the moderator at the event. So today's event is going to shine a spotlight on the ongoing conflict in Yemen, looking at the latest developments in the political and security situations, the peace process and prospects for a peaceful resolution, and not least looking at the ongoing humanitarian crisis in Yemen. The present conflict in Yemen has some roots in the Arab Spring of 2011, although its other roots have much earlier origins. In the aftermath of the 2011 uprising, Yemenis hoped for stability and a new beginning. There was much enthusiasm and energy, especially among Yemenis, which unfortunately quickly turned to disappointment. Simmering disputes erupted in outright violence. In 2014, the Houthi movement took control of the Yemeni capital Sana'a, forcing President Abdrabbuh Mansur Hadi and his government to flee, first to Aden and then to Saudi Arabia. Since 2015, a Saudi-led US-supported coalition has conducted a military campaign to end the Houthi advance and revert the capture of Sana'a. However, the campaign dragged on and turned into a form of economic attrition against the Houthis in an attempt to restore the power of the internationally recognized Hadi government. Although throughout the years multiple battlefields have emerged, new dynamics for the conflict have also developed. However, the war has now entered its sixth year, and the UN-led peace process between Hadi's government and the Houthis is considered to have stalled. The Houthis' close relationship with Iran gives the conflict a geostrategic dimension. The situation in Yemen has been referred to by the UN as the world's worst humanitarian crisis, a title that cannot be overstated. The recent Houthi campaign in Marib, an oil-rich central region of Yemen, has put further stress on an already frail nation. There are several ongoing efforts to revive and support the UN peace process, including that of the Special Envoy to Yemen for the United States, Timothy Lenderking, and also the European Union. But a lot of these attempts appear to have stalled. With Yemen at a crossroads on various fronts, we're delighted to be joined today by three distinguished speakers who are going to provide three different perspectives on the current situation and future prospects for Yemen. Firstly, I'm delighted to be joined by Her Excellency Sahar Ghanem, who's the ambassador for Yemen to the Netherlands, as well as non-resident ambassador for Yemen to Norway and Sweden. She today is going to give us the perspective of the Yemeni government. Secondly, we have with us Ambassador Peter Semneby, who is Sweden's special envoy to Yemen. Ambassador Semneby is an experienced diplomat who has worked in many conflict situations, such as the Caucasus and Afghanistan. And so we're pleased to have him here today to give us the international perspective on the conflict. Last but not least, we're joined by Ahmed Najai, who is non-resident scholar at the Malcolm H. Kerr Carnegie Middle East Center in Beirut. Ahmed will provide for us the perspective of Yemeni civil society. Do follow us and the Humanity Hub at Links Europe or at Humanity Hub on Twitter. And we also have a media page at Common Space EU. So without further ado, I'd like to pass on to Her Excellency Sahar Ghanem, who is going to, as I said, give us a bit about the government perspective. If you want to start, Your Excellency, and then I can ask you a few questions, and
Thank you,
take the
William.
floor.
Thank you so much, William. I really would like first to thank the Hague Humanity Hub and Links Europe for organizing this event. Is it the voice is clear? Yeah, okay. So for organizing this event, I think it's very important. I believe actually it is very important that Yemen always be part of the discussions around the world. What's happening in the country? We don't want people to feel frustrated, to feel that there is no hope in this conflict, and that they stop talking, thinking, and paying efforts to end the conflict in Yemen. People of Yemen really suffering. People of Yemen are in need to end this conflict as soon as possible. Today, they need to achieve a sustainable peace, not only a peace that will be for a certain period of time and then we will have another conflict. So it is very important for us we to participate in such kind of event, to see this kind of organizing these events, and to speak about Yemen all over the world to end the suffer of the Yemeni people. So you said in your introduction about the roots of the conflict in Yemen. It started, people are till today doubting when we started this, or when is the root of this conflict started. People will speak sometimes before 11, 12, 12, 11. People will sometimes will be speaking about even much before. But let's speak from the uprising of the youth in Yemen. That was, as you know, part of the or following many other uprising in the Arab world. We started the peace process, if I may call it, from that time, because from that time we started the reconciliation, the peace. So when people speak about peace, it's not only from the day of 2015 or from the day the Houthis entered the Sana'a, invaded the capital Sana'a, but we have attempts as Yemenis even before to have peace, to have transitional process, to establish a state, a civic state based on democratic means, based on a negotiation that we have during the National Dialogue Conference. So the first phase for us as Yemenis that we are all now referring to is the period of the transitional process, the National Dialogue Conference, and the agreement, which is called the GCC agreement, and the UN then also intervention. So that is our first. It was very successful at that point of time, or let me say, it was very promising, as also you said in your introduction. We thought that we are establishing now a peace, a lasting peace, a sustainable peace, inclusive peace, and inclusive state that we will have all groups as part of the not only the elite political ruling layer, but also local layers, because decentralization was discussed in that time. Houthis, by the way, were represented at that point of time fairly, and let me say more than fairly. I was myself member of the National Dialogue Conference. I've attended all the sessions. I've been part of many dialogues with Houthis, but from the beginning, we could feel that um, some groups, they have an agenda, or they have a different perspective about what is peace, what is political participation, what is government, and how they see the Yemen of tomorrow. So that was unfortunately the phase that we thought it will lead us to more peaceful, prosperous Yemen. Let me say, I will not say ended or demolished. I still have the hope that we will be able to resume from where we started, um, which I mean 2014, when the Houthis invaded the capital, Sana'a. And that is also a very important point, because people thought that the government directly involved with the Houthis in a conflict. But before they invaded the capital, Sana'a, we had a kind of negotiations with the Houthis, because their troops were around the capital Sana'a, and we agreed with them directly after one day, based also in that long discussion on what was called the Peace and Partnership Agreement. The problem with the Houthis that they never fulfilled their part of the commitment or their part of the agreement. After that, they continued, and many people, I don't want to go into the history, I believe many people understand what happened in Yemen in that point of time. They continued their aggression, they continued their attempts to control the institutions of the capital. And it ended up with, as you say, the President Abdrabbuh Mansur went to Aden. They airstruck his palace in Aden. This is when he also moved to Oman, then from Oman to Saudi Arabia. And then when we had the coalition, the Arab coalition. From that time till today, we had at least 5 official rounds of peace talks. Um, that was in the mid June of 2015, then December of 2015. So it is so clear from our side as the government that we had the willing from the very early beginning to engage in negotiations. 3 months in 2016, from I believe April till August, the negotiations took place, but in the last minute, the Houthis refused to sign it or refused to agree on the final agreement. And it was, let me say, from our history with them, we expected that they are not going to go into fulfilling their commitments. But we still again saying as a government, our willing till today. This is how we also now for uh, the talks that's happening today. We will say it, if there are 99 ways to end this conflict by military, and there is only one way to end it by peace, we believe that peace is better, not only for today, not only for ending the conflict today, but for also achieving a lasting peace, a peace that will spare this crisis and this suffer of our people, a peace that will help in establishing, re-establishing our state, our institutions, because now the problem is not only about people thinking about the direct confrontations, it is also about the weakness of the institutions in the country. It is also about the lack of the services, the safety, the security that the people suffering from. It is also about the economic situation, which is one of the main factors behind the humanitarian crisis. People sometimes speaking about, that there are no food in the country. Actually, this is not true for people who doesn't understand the situation. They only say that. But the main problem that people are not able to afford buying food, and are not able to afford living in a decent, minimum decent life. So that's another story that we all as Yemenis need to unite together to find a way for our people. Um, you ask about the future. For sure, I can't say a very clear answer about what will be the current future or the very near future. But again, the government is very much welcoming any attempts, any calls, and any approaches that will help us in establishing a peace. It will help us in resuming the presence, the strong presence of the Yemeni institutions on ground, the Yemeni ministries, the services, also the civic engagement of the Yemeni people with the government. Because what we can see from the situation now, it is going more into a military or militia style of ruling, especially. And when I speak here, the areas under the Houthi control, we see it is more like a militia than having any way of trying to serve the people. So this is for us very clear position that we are with the peace, with any attempts of the peace. Maybe you can follow also the current statements by the Timothy Linder King, the special envoy, the American special envoy, and the British also Minister of Foreign Affairs. They are welcoming and appreciating the encouraging involvement of the government with the peace cause that is happening or ongoing nowadays.
Okay, and so just to follow up on that, you said that the government is willing to do anything that it can. It's in that sense, I understand you'd be suggesting that the government is willing to make concessions if that is what's being demanded. But obviously, Yemen is often spoken about from a geopolitical perspective, influences from outside the country which are playing roles in the war. Now, could it be the case that it's worth consideration in formally involving outside actors, so Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Iran, for instance, in the peace process, so that it can reflect more of what's happening on the ground?
Yeah. So, first of all, the war is a Yemeni war, or the conflict is a Yemeni conflict. So, to solve the conflict, we need Yemenis to speak with each other, not the whole world to speak with Yemenis separately, then Yemenis speak with each other. So, and this is what we announced it clearly, that we are welcoming any direct conversation, any direct negotiations with the Houthis, and this is what we have been doing also for the last few years. So first of all, it needs to be Yemeni, then to be any other actors involved. Actually, Yemen should be isolated or separated from any other fires up to a certain level, to not be, restored till solving all the other problems in the region, then seeing what we will do with Yemenis. No, I believe that Yemen should be solved by its own as a crisis, as a standing alone crisis. But at the same time, we should not forget all the other regional roots and regional impact on our conflict. But it should be Yemeni parties should have the will to find the solution, and they should speak directly to each other first. If there will be any border then involvement, that's another story. It can be happening in addition to the Yemeni talk.
Okay, thank you, Your Excellency. We'll come back to you. I just want to now go across to Ambassador Peter Semneby, who is the Special Envoy for Sweden to Yemen. So we'll give you the opportunity here to unmute Ambassador Semneby, and then it would be great if you could give the international perspective on what's happening here with the peace process.
Well, thank you very much. I apologize for the possibly poor image and everything. I'm joining you from an airline lounge in Jeddah in Saudi Arabia, to add a bit exotism to this event. But I hope you can still hear me. Ambassador Ghanem has gone through the background of the conflict, and so I will not dwell upon that. What I would like to add is that we can see the roots of the current conflict, in fact, in the Arab Spring, which had the impact of making Yemen in the beginning, I would say, a model of countries in the Middle East, in the sense that Yemenis carried out a very successful and promising dialogue process, the National Dialogue Conference, which involved participants from all walks of life in Yemen. and which led to an almost agreement on the way Yemen should be governed. But of course, the Arab Spring also contained the curse that led to the conflict that we had today, and that is the institutional weakness that could not withstand the pressures that Yemen was faced with. That institutional weakness led to power vacuum that in turn led to regional actors seeing a need to protect their strategic interests, also in a preventive way, in order to prevent their rivals from doing so. Of course, there are many other factors as well, but I would like to mention this dichotomy between the promise of the Arab Spring and the curse that it contained. Ambassador Ghanem went through all the different efforts that have been made since then in order to negotiate an end to the conflict. These efforts are based on a United Nations Security Council resolution 2216, which has been, well, I should say it's a subject of debate because it provides, on the one hand, a fairly clear way forward, but on the other hand, it also constrains the possibilities for the UN negotiators to provide for creative solutions to the problems at hand. It's also it also contains the weakness that it involves one part of a conflict of a layer of conflicts in Yemen that it's a very multifaceted country and which has a long history of internal divisions, many of which are not covered by this resolution. The latest serious effort to bring the parties together, and the latest occasion when they came together was in Stockholm in December of 2018, which in fact also was the occasion when the only significant agreement so far in this conflict was reached, the so-called Stockholm Agreement, which covered quite a bit of ground, but the most significant part was the agreement on the strategic port city of Hodeidah, which was under siege at the moment, and at that moment, with the danger of humanitarian catastrophe in Hodeidah itself if the fighting would have spread to the urban area, but also it was also a city of significance because of the role that it plays in the commercial trade in Yemen and the imports of necessities of various kinds. It was successful in staving off the humanitarian disaster, but it has been criticized since then because other parts of the agreement, in essence, the neutralization of the city of Hodeidah, have not been implemented as was agreed at that time, which has to do with a lot of factors, but most fundamentally the fact that the agreement did not succeed in bridging the lack of trust that exists between the parties. There was a moment of hope in Stockholm when the chief negotiators, Khalid Yamani, the then foreign minister of Yemen, and Mohammed Abdul Salam, the chief negotiator of the Houthis, shook hands in the presence of the UN Secretary General and the Swedish foreign minister. But since then, the implementation has been very difficult indeed. At the moment, we have since we have seen some positive or some encouraging signs that could provide for a way forward after a very difficult period since Stockholm. We have seen a number of statements from signs from Saudi Arabia that Saudi Arabia, which intervened in March of 2015, wants to find a political solution to the conflict. And I think this was something that actually started in Stockholm. The impact on Saudi Arabia was that it demonstrated to the Saudis that it is possible to reach political agreements in this conflict. And since then, we have seen Saudi Arabia developing its own ties with the Houthis. We have seen the Saudis making very significant efforts in strengthening the Yemeni government through the so-called Riyadh Agreement, which brings in a significant southern group, the Southern Transition Council, in the government, with a double purpose of stabilizing southern Yemen, but also making the government more representative and stronger, more relevant in the political negotiations that we hope will take place. And this is, I would say, a single-handed Saudi achievement. This Riyadh Agreement has happened. It has been extremely difficult to implement this agreement as well, but the fact that it has been concluded at all is a success. We have also a change of tone and policy on the part of the United States, where Yemen rather unexpectedly became one of the foreign policy priorities of the new Biden administration right after it was the new president was inaugurated. This diplomatic drive by the United States has perhaps been more difficult than the Americans expected, but nevertheless has created some dynamism that we did not see in the last couple of years. We've also seen lately a mending of fences in the Gulf Cooperation Council, and with the Gulf countries now, I would say, not presenting a unified front, but at least talking to each other, discussing the important problems of the region in a constructive way. I think that also bodes well for the Yemen conflict. And finally, we have some new openings in the perhaps most significant regional conflict, and that is the one between Saudi Arabia and Iran. Iran, without doubt, is playing a role in Yemen. The fact that, which is also one of the main reasons why Saudi Arabia remains involved and why this conflict remains of existential importance to Saudi Arabia. And the fact that the two countries now have confirmed that they are talking to each other could perhaps also further down the line. I would not say that this is imminent, but could also lead to further openings in the Yemen conflict. It is important at the same time to make sure that Yemen does not just become a bargaining chip in a wider regional negotiation, because there are so many problems that are specific for Yemen that needs to be resolved, and Yemen should therefore be treated on its own merits. But at the same time, whatever happens in the wider regional conflict could have a positive impact on Yemen, and vice versa. And these opportunities should be grasped whenever they occur.
Hey, thank you, Ambassador Semnabi. And to go from that last point you make there about the regional importance of Yemen, let's zoom down now into Yemen itself, and we can speak to Ahmed Nagy, who is going to provide for us the civil society perspective. So, Ahmed, I want you to give us your perspective and the perspective of general civil society in Yemen on, does this peace process have a future? How can we better involve the local within the peace process? And what are the prospects for the humanitarian situation in Yemen? I will give you the floor now. I think if you unmute yourself. There we are.
Yes, thank you so
Great.
much for.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for the introduction, and thank you so much before that for the invite. Within my presentation, I will try to speak more about the missing part of the peace initiatives in Yemen. And of course, I will speak about the civil society, but within my presentation. So let me start by saying that the main problem in the current initiatives brokered by the UN and the US envoys is that they focus on the regional aspect of conflict and ignore the realities on the ground. On the other side, there is a very important issue that we always forget when it comes to peace deals. This issue is the lack of readiness. Sometimes initiatives look perfect, but they fail because easily some of the conflict sides have no interest to stop conflict at certain point and to start looking for a political solution. Simply because the conflict for them is the right approach, and they gain through military operations more than negotiation table. And this is exactly what we have seen during the last brokered initiatives. And this has actually created no place for any dialogue. Um, Second thing, the transformation of the conflict that wakened the governmental side enabled the Houthis to advance in many fronts and built a strong conviction within the Houthi leadership that the military track is the best approach that can allow them to get more, as I mentioned before. And this is actually what we are hearing today. The main barrier of the, let's say, the UN initiative or the Saudi initiative is the refusal of the Houthis. I still remember in 2017, during the Kuwait talks, the equation was totally different. And the Houthis showed kind of flexibility to negotiate. Why? Simply because the governmental forces were around 50 kilometers from the capital Sana'a. But today, when their forces is on the gate of Marib, they refused any sort of initiatives. And I think this has led us to another dimension of the conflict, which is related to why this kind of position coming from the Houthi side. In my perspective, it is not just a result of the growing military capabilities, as so many people mentioned. It's actually because of the, perhaps this is a part of the story, but it's actually beyond this description. The main factors created this position in the Houthi movement is the strategic flop of the coalition, the huge failure of anti-Houthi COP or anti-Houthi camp created this matter. And what I mean is that the Houthi behavior is a normal consequence of the coalition approach over the past 6 years. And in addition, there is another big hidden issue that is related to the Saudi Emirati coalition. Both countries try to escape from the huge mistakes they made in the areas under their control, which had ended up with disintegration of the Yemeni state. And the key question today is, what should we do? What should be done to start the solution? I've made actually some practical step, but this is actually can be discussed further. And the key of this practical step is that instead of running for an elusive political agreement, let's build a peace environment, because we have been talking about political agreement since 2015, even before 2014, or before that in 2012 during the national dialogue conference. And to achieve this practical steps, or to achieve this kind of peace environment, I have made actually 4 main points or 4 main strategies. The first one, we need to dry up the open battles. Today, we are struggling with the Marib offensive and what we should do for it. I think we need to build balanced front lines, meaning that we need to safeguard Marib by stopping the Houthis from any military advancement. Yemen cannot bear a new humanitarian disasters. And the same approach could be adopted in the other front lines, because if we see in the other areas in Yemen, some front lines are balanced. And because of this balance in the front lines between the two sides, there is no conflict. And we need to have this scenario in the Marib battle as well. The second point under this strategy is to avoid conflict between the UAE and Saudi Arabia proxies in Aden, because this is actually what we have receiving nowadays. There is a huge tension between them. And the third point under this strategy is to lift the blockade in all Yemen ports, while adopting a mechanism to monitor the flow of arms to the Houthis or any other militias in the country. The second strategy is to focus on the local level and try to build the state from within. Today, one of the key issues that we are facing is the weakness of the governmental institutions. So in my perspective, we have to do 5 key points here. The first one is the government should return to Yemen and work from Yemen. Why they should be in the exile? And the second thing, we need to restore the economic institutions, including oil facilities and the central bank, so that they can provide salaries not only to the people who are in the governmental areas, but also the civil servants who are in the areas under the other militias, because they have nothing to do with this kind of de facto authorities. And the third point is to focus on the stable areas instead of war zone areas. Try to invest on the local pocket of stability, which today hosts hundreds of thousands of people, and try to focus on them. Try to support the local governorates and local governance in these areas. And the fourth point, we need to form a governance council or residential council from the governors of the stable areas, and try to revive the parliament in order to avoid any coming political vacuum, because today the health condition of President Hadi is not good, by the way, and we are facing a huge problem if something happened to him. And the last point under this strategy is to build a network of local peace mediators to de-escalate the ongoing conflict in many areas. We couldn't resolve the huge fight. Let's deal with the fights case by case and try to empower the local mediators. And here, when it comes to Yemeni civil society, this is the Yemeni version of the civil society, because we have very active tribal figures who can play this significant role. The third strategy is on the diplomatic level. We need to separate Yemen from the regional actors. And I always emphasize this. We don't want to link Yemen with the nuclear negotiation. That will take decades, maybe. We need to make Yemeni case is totally separate from them. And this is actually one of the key things we need to emphasize. And under this level, under the diplomatic level, we need to keep the negotiation door open with the Houthis and try to use the regional leverage from Oman, from Kuwait, in order to have this kind of connections with the Houthis in the coming months or in the coming years. And we need, and this is actually a very important point, since we have this kind of shift in the US diplomacy, we need actually to put pressure on the Saudi and the UAE to change their rule to be in the line of restoring state, because this is actually one of the key issues that we are facing today. And last strategy, and I will end here, is on the humanitarian side. We have seen actually very active movement from some humanitarian organizations, but two main things I think it's important to focus on. The first one, they should support the developmental project rather than food baskets, or the daily needs of people, because we have talking about supporting Yemenis through humanitarian campaigns, but this conflict will apparently will take longer in the future. So let's start with developmental projects and try to focus on the rural areas as well, because 70% of Yemenis are in the rural areas. And the last point, we need to stop branding Yemen as a place of conflict or war. I still remember in my last visit to Yemen, just 2 years ago, one of the farmers told me, I used to actually export my agricultural products easily, but when the international organization started branding Yemen as a place of war, as a place of conflict, as a place of disease, people today refuse to buy from me. So I'm suffering a lot. So many people who are working with me have lost their jobs because of this kind of branding. They have goodwill to good intention actually to support Yemenis, but on the other side, they are affecting and damaging some other families as well. I will stop here, and if you have any questions, I will be glad to answer. Thank you.
So thank you very much there, Ahmed. I mean, an awful lot to unpack, but also some very tangible examples of things that can be done. And on that basis, I'd actually like to give the floor back to you, Ambassador Ghanem, because I would like to hear your response to what Ahmed said there. Which of those ideas do you feel would be plausible? Which of these ideas do you think that the government could get behind? Are there reasons why certain things that were suggested there simply wouldn't be possible or have been considered? Or was there anything that was entirely new for you? But yeah, the floor is yours.
Yeah, so thank you to Ahmed. Ahmed is a very prominent scholar, Yemeni scholar, and he's very well respected by many Yemenis. I'll pick from his talk a few points that I really agree with. First of all, the idea or the recommendation of helping in normalizing and stabilizing the areas that are already in a way or another stable comparing to the rest of the country. So that is very important. We as a government called many times upon our friends countries the importance to support the government to work, to actively work from ground, because it is not enough for us to show the diplomatic support, although it is very welcomed and very appreciated. However, as a government, as any car need fuel to to run, we as a government also need big support, especially if you take into consideration that this government came after a long time of conflict. So there are many challenges on ground to deal with. So for example, the government that was composed after the Riyadh agreement that arrived Aden, in the day it arrived, it was airstrike or it was shelled by the Houthis based on the even some international reports. So that's kind also of the challenges that was faced directly by the government and also some other governments or the government before. It is also very important for us to get the help from our friends again. So that help will help us also, or that assistance will help us first to provide services to the people that in a way or another will create more peaceful situation. It will help in returning security and safety up to a certain level on the areas under the government at least, and that will help us stop that continuous conflict in different places. So it is very important to step and practical, let me say, step also in re-establishing the institution, governmental institutions that will provide services and basic security to the people of those areas, and it will help to be the first step into more comprehensive peace in the country. So I really agree upon this point from Ahmed's recommendation, and I think it's one of the most practical, actually, recommendation that can be done and can be done quickly. We received that was February or March, I'm not sure, a delegation from the EU countries, from the EU ambassador, visited Aden to show support to the new composed government. That was a very important signal, and it was very important step. We depend more on that kind of support to deal directly with the government in helping it achieve what I said of the first step of peace in the country. There are for sure many complexities prior to the situation in Yemen. It's not easy to speak about immediate peace, as also Ambassador Peter spoke about the challenges. Sometimes also we do some steps thinking that they will be with positive impact, like Stockholm Agreement, but in the end, we see that our expectations were not really true. For example, Hudaida, we were very close, up to 1 kilometer of Hudaida port and Hudaida city, and I'm here speaking about the governmental forces. It was very important for us and legal for us as a government, based on the resolution 2216, to resume or restore all the Yemeni territories to the control of the government. We were very close, but then under the international pressure, we stopped as the government and the coalition. It was a huge, actually, pressure for good purposes. But now, if you look at the situation in Hudaida, it is much worse than the situation before. Houthis is still getting the revenues from Hudaida, millions of dollars monthly, and it helps them to actually fuel their confrontations and war against the government, and also against the neighbor countries. From the other side, it also continue this kind of long, ongoing conflict, also against the people of Yemen. I mean, I'm sure that everybody following how many uh, 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 um, abuse, or let me say, it's becoming like as what the Dutch ambassador called it. It is a police state becoming in the Sana'a and the areas under the Houthis. So also that is not a peace. That is not for the future. If we accept, and I am hearing Ambassador Peter speaking about the doubts about the resolution 2216, that we need more practical, innovative solution, but that at the same time will help rewarding militias, will help giving examples to groups, military groups in our country, to be to develop those groups, and then to talk areas or control over certain places of the country, using the weakness of the state, and then putting their own condition at the table. And that's very dangerous for us as a Yemenis if we will go into that approach, rewarding militias for their coup against the state, or for their attempts to control areas, and putting their pressure and their conditions to fulfill their agendas. That's very dangerous. We should not be rewarding them. We should always stick to the right thing, which is democracy, state, anti-coups, military coups, and anti any violence into gaining the power of any country. So those are the principles, and we need to stick to those principles in solving any problem, and that should be the situation in Yemen. I agree with many points of Ahmed, but one of the most is that the recommendation of staff or normalizing these situation in the areas that have minimum level of stability.
Okay. Well, what we'll do now is I will give the opportunity to everybody who's here to put their hands up, and if anybody would like to ask a question, then we can unmute you. I did see that there was a couple of questions that came in, but if do I see any virtual hands here? No. Ooh, my screen has gone. Well, I know that Dennis Samet was interested in asking a question, as he mentioned to me earlier. So I don't know if Dennis is there. Let me see.
Hi. Well, yes, I have two questions really. Well, one is a general question to our Yemeni colleagues, because I appreciate what they were saying about this being a Yemeni issue which needs to be solved by Yemenis. Clearly, this is the case, and should not be otherwise. There is, however, a finer point related to the reality. And the reality is that we have in the Yemeni situation now a number of international players who are participants directly in the conflict in one way or the other. And so their involvement, in my view, cannot be excluded completely. And perhaps we may be looking at parallel processes rather than one process, but clearly the acquiescence of external partners is going to be important for taking this process forward, consolidating it, and bringing it to some conclusion in the future. So I wonder what they think about this, because this is how it looks to me from outside. But obviously, I expect they have strong feelings about this issue, and I would like to hear these feelings. And secondly, a question for Ambassador Peter Semneby. You mentioned the Biden initiative shortly after the new president came into office. I wonder whether the timing of that initiative, or whether the initiative itself helped at that point, or whether it has confused the issue a little bit in terms of the role of the United Nations. Is there coordination between the international players when it comes to the peace process in Yemen? And is there coordination between the peace process and the challenge to deal with the humanitarian crisis? Because we have not spoken too much about this, but clearly the humanitarian crisis looms over the whole conflict and has done so from the beginning. And this creates a number of challenges. So I wonder if the two things are moving somehow in parallel, the peace process and tackling the humanitarian crisis. I heard also what Ahmed Naji said regarding the need to shift from giving out food parcels to development. I think this is absolutely essential point. And the other point that he made was that where there is a stable government, where there is in areas where there is no conflict, perhaps the international community should be doing more to ensure that this peace is consolidated on the ground, because peace should not come only from top down; it has to come up also from bottom up. And so I wonder whether Ambassador Semneby has any views on these issues. Thank you.
Okay, well, first let's go to Ahmed to answer Dennis's first question there on regional involvement. Ahmed, are you able to unmute yourself? I think we've given you the...
Okay, thank you so much for the question. I totally agree with you. We need a multi-track mechanisms. The first track can focus on the regional actors, since they are involved in the Yemen's conflict. and the other track on the local level. But again, we need to adopt an approach that put it in a way that it's a inside out approach, not outside in approach, in the meaning that the main issue, the main focus should be on the local side. And one more thing, and this is actually the reason behind mentioning this point. We have been speaking about this point since 2015, but there was no any sort of the international support, and people usually portray the conflict as it is a proxy war between some regional actors. But today, the shift of the U.S. Policy, I think, is very important, and we need also to convince the regional actors to move or to change their behavior inside Yemen to be in support to the state, not to undermine the state, because this is actually one of the key problems that we are facing. And one last point that I need to mention here: the conflict in Yemen, and this is actually the nature of it, started in an area close to the Yemeni-Saudi border, then moved to the northern areas till Sana'a, and it's like a snowball, and it will not stay in Yemen if they don't have the right policy. And this is actually what the international community should send the regional actors who are I mean, bordering Yemen's and who are close to Yemen. Thank you.
Ambassador Gannon, do you want to add to this quickly?
I already said about the role of the regional powers. We cannot ignore the geopolitics of the conflict, but at the same time, we don't want to connect it to the files that are hard and difficult to be solved. Yemen is a Yemeni crisis. It has for sure connections to the regional other conflicts, and you can see it, for example, very clearly with the Houthi movement and their connection to Iran, to the Iranian agenda, not only to Iran as a support for a Yemeni for their local agenda. No, actually, they are also serving a more Iranian agenda for the whole region. So that is very important to be taken into consideration. However, it is also very important to not connect the solution of the Yemeni crisis into the solution of some other complicated and difficult files, like the nuclear file that Ahmed mentioned, and that will really make the solution in Yemen very difficult, and maybe will not be even able to reach one unless we reach a solution to the major conflict. However, we should not forget or should not ignore the impact and the influence of the regional files, of the regional conflicts, the regional challenges, and how to kind of minimize that influence by some other talks connected directly to the Yemeni crisis. Yes, that's the thing.
Thank you. So we have, just before I give the floor to Ambassador Semneby, I noticed there's a question from Saif Al-Hadi, and I think I'll let unmute him quickly. And then I think that this is directed also to Ambassador Semneby, and that will allow you then the opportunity to answer both Dennis's question and Saif's at the same time. So Saif, we'll give you the opportunity to unmute. We are a little bit over time here, but I think that we don't want to stop the conversation if it's mid-flow. So Saif,
okay.
Yeah, you have the
Yeah,
floor.
Okay, I can go ahead just to save some time. Thanks so much for the opportunity. My question to Mr. Beta is, they are always talking about we support negotiated peace for Yemenis, but whenever youth try to reach those, let's say, foreigner or international influencers, like those working in the embassies or those ambassadors, it's very hard for youth to sit in a table with those ambassadors and embassies. So I always wonder what kind of negotiated peace they are looking after, as youth are almost or more 70% of the Yemeni nation are under the age of 35 years old. So the future is youth. The future is for the children. So how are they consulting Yemeni youth? Are the Yemeni youth being consulted or collaborated with this? Are they leading any efforts? I always wonder, like, I don't see youth in any approach or any means that those international influencers or powers can give the means to youth to contribute to influencing or framing the negotiated peace. So my question to him is, how are youth engaged through the international influencers?
So, Ambassador Semneby, that was the second question. And as a reminder, the first question was to do with the alignment or coordination between the different international actors promoting peace. The floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much. Well, it was, I think Dennis's question was also more specifically about the Biden initiative and its impact, whether it helped or not. Well, I think the fact that Yemen is now explicitly a priority of the United States does help, and it helps to concentrate the minds of a lot of other actors as well. And the fact that the US is willing to put some political weight behind different proposals and working very closely together with the United Nations is a positive development. The American engagement could have been formulated in a different way. Yemen could have been part of a regional diplomatic initiative, which would have made it much more difficult to treat Yemen on its own merits and to insulate the solution that has to be found in Yemen from the bad impact of the regions. I think the American initiative still does in fact give rise for some hope, even if it has been probably more difficult than the administration hoped to get traction. Yemen is relatively fortunate in the sense also that the United Nations Security Council is relatively unified in its approach on Yemen. Dennis asked about the connection between the peace process and humanitarian affairs. On the one hand, of course, the humanitarian issues should be treated on their own merits based on humanitarian needs only, but then at the same time, we all know that the single most important humanitarian measure is to end conflict. There is a humanitarian imperative behind all efforts that are being made. We saw that in Stockholm in 2018. It was the humanitarian imperative that made that agreement possible. We see it also now in Marib, where we have a situation with a very large number of IDPs being threatened with renewed displacement as a result of the offensive. If we look at what's on the table that the United Nations has proposed, it's quite a few different measures, but the most important humanitarian impact is going to be had if the ceasefire, comprehensive ceasefire, is agreed. Peace is, I agree, peace is not only top down, it's also bottom up. Yemen is an extremely complex place. The peace efforts, the National Dialogue Conference was a very serious and successful, promising, I should say, attempt to broaden the scope of peacemaking in Yemen to all parts of society. It was to some extent elite-based as well, but it involved all regions, tribal elements, and political parties, and so on. And this is an experience that we have to build on once we have gone beyond the very binary efforts that are underway at the moment. These binary efforts also have to be complemented by all kinds of, and are being complemented already by all kinds of track 2 activities, dialogue processes, and so on. But I think the negotiation efforts could possibly benefit if those efforts were tied more closely to the sort of main track of the United Nations process. That also leads me to the question of youth, that should of course be all voices should be part of, should have outlets in the efforts to find ways forward for Yemen. It's not only about youth, it's about, as I mentioned, we should make sure that all regions, tribal elements, women should be represented properly in these processes as well. Much has been done. Many of those participating in this conversation are actively involved in these efforts. But again, we should probably make greater efforts to make sure that those involved in these processes feel that it's not only a sidetrack that they are involved in, but that this has relevance, that it impacts the main track of the political negotiations, and that the participants in these processes are being given a stake in the future of Yemen.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Semneby. So I think what we'll do now is it'll give an opportunity to our audience to have a little bit more of an intimate conversation amongst each other. I'd like to thank just now though all three of our speakers, Your Excellency Sahar Ghanem, Ahmed Nagy, and Ambassador Peter Semneby. And I'm very impressed, Ambassador Semneby, with you joining from the lounge in Jeddah Airport. So thank you very much. But what we'll do now is we'll give you a chance to join these breakout rooms. I'm going to hand over to Alex Tilandier, who will tell us a little bit more about them. Each room will be loosely connected to a different topic that we've been discussing today. And it's an opportunity both to discuss these ideas as well as just to meet other people. So